Civil rights, the one most important thing promised as a US citizen, ever. But what happens when that right is violated? Let's widen our scope on this. The US is home to around 300 million people. Around 6.1 million of these people are felons with completed sentences. Because of one minor nonviolent incident, the majority of these 6.1 million people have lost the most important right of a US citizen forever: voting rights. This unnecessary loss has not only caused inequality among people of color and minorities, but also alters the very system that we all live under today. So senators, millions of people, many of whom are our very own constituents, are begging us today to vote yes on this bill, a bill to end nonviolent felon disenfranchisement. There are three crucial reasons why you should consider affirming this life-changing bill today. First, disenfranchisement violates human rights and is utterly unconstitutional. As a nation, we strive for equal rights. In fact, we fought countless wars and lost countless lives over them. In 2019, NCSC.org writes that the right to vote is fundamental to our nation's democracy, and should be guaranteed to each and every citizen. But why not give felons who aren't even involved in any violence the same amount of rights? Making one or two mistakes doesn't make them less human than we are. This discardment of rights for over 6 million American citizens violates the very Constitution our founding fathers wrote. Ratified in July of 1868, Amendment 14 grants every U.S. citizen the same fundamental rights. In fact, Section 1 of the amendment explicitly states that a state cannot restrict voting rights unless it shows a compelling state interest. A denial of one's promised rights is completely unacceptable. In 2019, scholar Alan Carlson voices that continuing to prevent a person from being able to vote when they have done their time really says that they have not yet done their time. It makes them less committed to a society that won't let go. But second, disenfranchisement causes minorities to get unequal representation, which weakens democracy. Experts from the Sentencing Project found that disenfranchisement policies altered the outcome of 7 U.S. Senate races from 1970 to 1998, as well as the 2000 Bush-Gore presidential election. Even if disenfranchised voters in Florida alone had been permitted to vote, Bush's narrow victory would have most certainly been reversed. On top of that, in April of last year, Newsweek.org wrote that disenfranchisement causes a racial disparity. Black people are 5 times more likely to get disenfranchised than white people, resulting in over 7% of the Black population suppressed from voting rights. Denying the right to vote to an entire class of citizens is deeply problematically both morally and democratically. But finally, let's look at some of the successful countries that have been granting everyone voting rights. Countries like Canada, Sweden, Finland, South Africa, Ukraine, Switzerland, just to name a few, protect their felons' voting rights. This has resulted in better citizenship among their civilians, good democratic results, and amazing worldwide reputations. In June of this year, U.S. candidate Bernie Sanders replied to this by saying, comparing the U.S.'s position on guaranteeing voters' rights to countries around the globe, the U.S. is anything but a leader. Senators, it's time to follow our fellow neighbors in their humane acts and give felons an equal right and opportunity. America was built upon the idea of equality. So give us equality and stand with me in the firmest affirmation of today's bill, because we need to unlock democracy, not just in the streets, but also in the cells. Thank you. All right, bill number 2. America strives to be a country of safety. It strives to be a country that values each and every individual, and it strives to be a country of respect. However, in 2019, the Anti-Defamation League reports that at least 49 innocent individuals were murdered as a result of domestic terrorism. How can one feel safe or valued or respected in a society like this? But we as Congress can change this by passing the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act of 2020. Stand with me and affirm this piece of legislation, because domestic terror across our country has influenced our country's development and demands a response from Congress, but also because this legislation is going to enhance the federal government's efforts to prevent and respond to domestic terrorism. So first, Domestic terrorism within our country, particularly from violent far-right extremists and white supremacist organizations, have caused a lot of brutality and demands a response from Congress. Right-wing extremists alone were responsible for over 150 terrorist acts, and plots and conspiracies that took place in the United States between 1993 and 2017. Over a dozen innocent civilians have been murdered by domestic terrorism in just a single year. We've seen far too many cases of hate crimes and murders stemming from these supremacist and extremist organizations. This cannot continue anymore. In fact, just recently, after the devastating loss of George Floyd in the hands of custody, a neo-Nazi extremist group responded to the Black Lives Matter civil rights movement by saying, quote unquote, "Do not allow our lands to turn into the Haiti." He responded to this and also said that it's time to shut the savage beast down and to shut down Black Lives Matter. They created their own slogan, titled White Lives Matter. Afterwards, they went on to commit many hate crimes in many neighborhoods. We can clearly see that religious minorities and communities of color are at grave risk from the ongoing domestic terrorism threat facing the US today. In fact, just last year, the Trump administration Department of Justice official wrote that white supremacy and far-right extremism are among the greatest domestic security threats facing the US. But secondly, this bill will enhance matters and increase the federal government's efforts to prevent, report on, respond to, and investigate acts of domestic terrorism. One of the main reasons why domestic terrorism still stands in this country is because we haven't had a respondent government that regularly assesses this huge threat. In 2019, the New York Times wrote that regarding domestic violence, over the past 25 years, law enforcement at both the federal and state levels have been slow to respond. But passing this legislation is just enough to solve the problem. The Secretary of Homeland Security writes in September of 2019 that this bill is not just a strategic framework for countering terrorism, but rather it addresses both terrorism and targeted violence. It makes new methods of creating a more comprehensive understanding the challenge of terrorism and targeted violence both within and outside the federal government. Installing offices and interagency task forces are just what we need right now, and this is just what this bill promises. Senators, today we have looked at the crucial problems and the fatal attacks associated with domestic terrorism and discussed the solution this bill offers. I think we can all come to the conclusion that for the future of our nation, for the safety of our constituents, and for the lives that we lost, we must affirm the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act of 2020. Thank you.